Chris, I'm going to be a little crass. I don't understand the Nature Conservancy, and I don't understand why anyone should care about it. So it's cool that you're the director, but I just don't understand. They're cool words kind of put together. But what do you guys actually do, and why are you guys doing what you're doing?
I've been working for the Nature Conservancy for getting close to 30 years. I mean, 28 and a half
Wow.
years or something. Um, I started as a land manager, and the reason that I joined the Conservancy at the time was that I was really interested in managing land for biodiversity, for all kinds of plants and animals. And at the time, most of my friends were looking at land management jobs that are either focused on something like, we're going to manage this for pheasants, or we're going to manage this for trees, or something like that. And I really wanted to do something really broad because I thought it was more interesting. So that was my initial reason for getting into the Conservancy. Um, but I've stuck around because it's a nonprofit organization which gives me a lot of flexibility to be creative and innovative. There's less red tape, even though we've gotten big, and there is more red tape than there used to be. We still have a lot of flexibility to try new things and take risks that other people have a hard time doing, which gives me a lot of space to play in. It's a large organization, but each individual piece of it is sort of allowed to have some flexibility and try things that make sense locally, conservation wise. So, in Nebraska, we work mostly with private landowners. That's where conservation happens, is on private land. That's very different than somebody out in Washington State or Indonesia or wherever they're from, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Nature Conservancy we're a large international organization. We're focused on things like the biodiversity crisis and climate change and how to find solutions to those kinds of challenges that are good for nature and people and the coexistence of all of us.
Yeah, I like that.
So who funds it?
What's an unfair criticism that gets thrown your guys' way? Because that happens to almost every nonprofit. There's
Sure. I mean, there's lots of them. I'll give a few examples. One, that we're the federal government, and we're not. We have no regulatory power.
yeah,
Our funding comes from donations of members. We do get grants from the federal and state governments for sure,
sure.
as well as corporations. I mean, we'll take money from good causes, do good things in a lot of different ways. But we get linked in with the government a lot. Similarly, I think we get lumped in with any other conservation organization that someone might not like, and they just assume we're all the same, right?
Yeah.
We get accused of not paying property taxes. The land that we own in Nebraska, we pay property taxes on that land, like we're part of the community.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. We get accused of being anti-hunting. We have hunting on the properties that we have here in the Nature Conservancy in Nebraska. So yeah, those are a few of them. It's once we get to know somebody and we sort of explain what we actually do, we can almost always have a really good conversation. But the kind of the stereotypes, the unfair characterizations are sure out there.
Do you ever
Yeah.
get tapped by regulators to say like, "Hey, what's your professional or researched opinion on these things?" Do they like consult you at all?
Not me. No, hardly ever. We have some government relations staff that work with policymakers, and so we're having those conversations at a different place in the organization, but that's not something that I deal with much.
Interesting. What do you feel like? What's been the biggest needle mover that the Nature Conservancy has been a part of since you've been with them?
I think that, what I said earlier about when I started as a land manager and I couldn't find other organizations that were thinking broadly about the diversity of life in terms of management, I think that's really shifted. I think the Nature Conservancy's played a big role in that. There are a lot of organizations now that think that way, which is amazing. And it's not that we did that by ourselves, but I think we were a large voice in that conversation and trying to push people toward thinking more broadly.
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of questions, but for anyone who doesn't know, Chris was on one of our very first episodes. Please do not go back and listen to it. and
Well, just listen to the parts where Chris talks. And,
yeah, just skip on through it. No, I want to give Chris some flowers because Ken and I, we're pretty embedded in the prairie community at this point, and you can start to see some leaders in the prairie community. Prairie Moon, give them some flowers. They do an incredible job online giving out information. Tallgrass Prairie Center with research and making sure there's good ecotypes of the prairie and finding these species on remnants. Dan Allen produces like half of all the Forbes in the Midwest. You know, there are these behemoth, these leaders in prairie. And then there's Chris Helzer with a blog. And I mean, it doesn't sound as like crazy as all the others, but in terms of influence and what's being talked about in prairie, Chris is up there. You know, a lot of the stuff you might hear on more popular podcasts, more mainstream things, you know, maybe Kyle Leibarger. A lot of these things come from Chris and some of the stuff he's discovered with his camera and his observant eye and just his critical thinking and his research. So you deserve a lot of credit. I don't want to blow over that. I think the organization you're a part of is great, but Chris is a key part to our prairie conservation efforts in the Midwest, and so thank you for what you do there.
Well, I appreciate that. The blog has been a really interesting experience. It's definitely gotten a lot more attention than I ever thought it would. It's funny, I started it because I wrote a book about the ecology and management of prairies, and I was super frustrated by the time the book got published because it takes a year just to get the thing published after you finish writing. And so there are all these things that I learned and I had new ideas and I couldn't do anything about it because it was set. And then there's no reaction, right? It's like speaking to a void when you write a book. And so I wanted some way to get feedback and to be able to put new ideas out there. And the blog was just sort of the thing that I stumbled upon. I had never read a blog before I started my blog. I still don't really read blogs. It's not something that, so I'm grateful that anybody thinks that my blog is interesting.
That's funny.
Because I don't see that as a medium that's great, but I'm glad that other people do. And I've gotten more into social media. You know, I use Instagram wrong because I write way too much and I post about things that are weird. But that has also been really interesting because it's a way to get some feedback on ideas. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that you think it's useful, and it has been really good for me in terms of. I mean, I've learned so much by throwing ideas out there and then getting that feedback, and it gets me invitations to come places and see things or give a talk and then visit with people. And so the 15 years, 15 years that blog has been running now, it's been fantastic.
Man, it's interesting because I think I was thinking through it and I went through a list of everything I could think of. If you take out hunting as part of conservation, I think in terms of prairie conservation, you have the largest audience because a big chunk of our audience comes from hunting or cattle grazing or, you know, some of these other alternative farming or policy. That's where a lot of our audience comes from. You know, and then of course you've got like Pheasants Forever, huge organization. Take out hunting, you know, how many are left? I think you have the biggest pure prairie audience of anyone, you know, and it says on your website how many subscribers you have. But I agree with you. If you got a subscriber to a blog, they're committed because I don't know anybody that reads a blog.
Right.
But I've read yours a bunch, you know, and about half the time you search anything prairie, the Prairie Ecologist website comes right up to the top and has answers for you. So,
well, I mean, that is one of the things I love about it is, you know, over 15 years, I've got something that I've said on a lot of different topics. And like you said with the podcast here, I mean, not everything I've written is still relevant today, but there's not much that I wouldn't point someone to. And it's just cool that if somebody's looking for something on goldenrod or on, fire and grazing or something like that, there's a decent chance they'll stumble upon a perspective that I brought up. And usually what I'm saying is, here's what we're learning or here's what we're thinking about. It's almost never here's how you should do this, right? It's not prescriptive. And hopefully it gets people thinking in a new way and helps them explore and find answers, you know, to whatever they're looking for. So that is a really cool part of the blog.
How do you, because Kent and I are a little in this space where we have to kind of manage our thought productivity. We have to come up with new topics and we have to be insightful on them or people just won't give a rip about how do you protect your, I know this is kind of a selfish question. Sorry, listeners. How do you protect your mind to make sure that your thoughts are high quality enough to put out there or like giving yourself enough space to produce these thoughts?
I mean, so I agree with you. I tell people it's like being a preacher. where you're sort of given the same messages over and
Yeah.
over and trying
Oh
to
yeah,
find new ways
yeah.
to say
That's
it,
true.
right?
That's
I'm
so
not a
true.
preacher, to be clear. Um, I I think the best work that I do on the blog or in general is when I can be out in the field and see something that strikes me as curious, and then I think about it, and then I just write about my curiosity, right? It's, hey, I saw this thing today, it made me think about this and maybe wonder this. And then I could start a post or a conversation based on that. Those are I think the things that are most interesting. And sometimes it's something that's accumulative where I've been thinking about this over the last several years and it's finally starting to gel enough in my head that I think I have a story to tell about it. And sometimes it's like immediate. I'll get back from going out and taking pictures and I'll put up a few pictures of this little caterpillar or something that I saw, and I'll say something like, I saw this thing today. I didn't know exactly what I was seeing, so I came back and I looked it up, and here's what I learned. And isn't this amazing? I think those are the things that work best for me. But I'm always sending myself emails because I'll wake up at 3 in the morning and I'll think, this is really
Yeah.
interesting. I'll send an email to myself,
Interesting.
say blog topic X, right? And then I can draw on that library of ideas a lot of times.
Interesting. I have notes on my phone, but a problem I'm running into. Kent doesn't run into it. He's running into the opposite problem. More and more of my time is being spent on content. My content comes from the time I've spent in the field or with people like you, or you know what I mean, cleaning seed or actually like doing the
Yeah.
things. That's what gives us credibility, Ken and I credibility in the first place, is we've done the things. And I'm doing the things less and less, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
this is not. I need to, be in the field or be on people's land. And so the more
I'm
time
going to
I'm
go ahead and
behind a
hit a
computer,
mark for that statement right there to be replayed.
it's going to be Kent's alarm in the morning is me saying I need to be outside in the field more. Well, you heard him. Oh man. All right.
No, no,
Well, that was
I'm with you on that. By the way, I've been with the Conservancy again almost 30 years now, and I have to fight really hard to stay in the field. It's hard to do that over a long career because, especially if you want to keep doing new things and changing your perspective. But I supervise our land management staff, which means I have to be out there seeing what they're doing. I'm still brainstorming ideas about restoration and management projects. I help evaluate the work that we're doing in the field, so that makes me be out there. And then the photography is the biggest one, right? If I'm looking for something to do on a weekend or an evening or in the early morning or whatever, it's going out to take pictures, which gets me out to see what's happening and get curious. And yeah, but I know what you mean. And I don't think you can be credible in this space if you're not out looking at things all the time.
yeah.
Yeah, creativity just it needs experience so much. So I mean, I was thinking that yesterday, as we mentioned before we started recording. I was up in Driftless, Iowa, this past weekend with my family, and going to a lot of the hot spot. One of the things I love about Driftless, Iowa, is the hot spots are natural spots. It's not like so many other places of take me to Plastic City and show me your biggest roller coaster. It's show me your best view of a trout stream running through a carved out valley, and show me the changing tree colors and things like that, and just being there and being in it just felt so inspiring. And I do get a lot of that here, but when it's your work every day, you can almost get some I don't know what's the you build up like a tolerance, I guess, to the effects of that natural high that you get by being in the production fields and seeing the same sites every day. So going out and seeing different types of prairie ecosystems and different farming practices, even, as that is a big part of what we discuss here too, is on the agricultural side. And the way that the land is used is just, it sparks so much creativity, I think, to be able to have that in-person
Well, plus
relationship.
Plastic City is just getting so expensive now.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true. Man, nothing could be more of a letdown for me than to be like, Kent, guess what? We got this great vacation planned. We're going to go to this amusement park and we're going to eat. we're gonna eat corn dogs, and we're gonna, like just everything. Just, no,
Yeah.
can't
I'm
I
gonna
just
take
go to
you there
work?
on your birthday next year.
I call that getting invited on vacation to go do my 85th favorite thing. It's like.
Oh man, that's funny. All right. Riley told me that I wasn't allowed to leave this podcast without asking you about cattle on Prairie. Everyone's hypothesized. In fact, I think someone told me that CRP, it just got approved. Like they're going to start letting people graze on CRP, but I didn't hear it from anyone that I know is in the know. Is that true?
I have not heard that.
I mean, I know in Nebraska at least, people have been doing CRP grazing for a while. It's restrictive. There's a lot of limitations. You have to give up some of the money that you get, all those, but it is possible to do it. So maybe it's a state by state thing that Iowa maybe is changing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll need to look at, but there are very few people that have actually done it. Dr. Patrick Kaiser over in the East has done it, but I'm curious if you had any
To be
experience.
clear, you're not saying, by saying done it, you're not saying go and graze CRP. You're talking graze prairie. Right?
Yeah. In the middle of the night, grazing out
Incriminating
the
poor
CRP.
Patrick Kaiser on the Prairie Farm podcast.
But yeah, so have you had experience with that? Riley was telling me he thought you had. He's a resident.
Grazing in general or grazing in CRP?
Grazing on prairie. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's a huge part of the management work we do. I think it's great. So grazing in prairies is a huge topic because I think a lot of people, especially further east in prairies, so I would say like Iowa eastward, the experience most people have with cattle, especially in prairies, is very negative, right? You think about it like the putting green look of a prairie. You think about the sort of the plant species that have disappeared because of chronic overgrazing, and that's what people are used to. That's what they think about. Maybe it's even the manure flowing into the rivers, all those sort of things. It doesn't have to look like that, right? I mean, the thing that I love about cattle grazing and grazing in general, because we use both bison and cattle here in Nebraska, it's such a flexible approach to prairie management. You're working with animals that are making decisions bite by bite. What they want to eat, where they want to go is a choice that changes over time. You can change the timing, the duration, the frequency, the intensity of that management treatment in a way that's much harder with other things that we do. And there's lots of ways to do it poorly, but there's also lots of ways to do it well, right? And so there are people that are moving cattle quickly through a lot of paddocks. That's not what I'm interested in, but for some objectives, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Do it if it does what you want. But there's also lots of other ways to do it. Sometimes combining with fire, combining with mowing or haying. And what I've found over time is that we've been able to maintain the plant diversity that we've invested in a restoration project or just in a remnant prairie through a long period of time with cattle grazing, while also being able to manipulate habitat structure in a way that I haven't found another way to do it. So having areas that are really short cropped, but not uniformly. Like even when we graze something really heavy for an entire season, there are always some plants that are ungrazed that are providing a little bit of variation in that structure. And then there's areas that haven't been burned or grazed for a few years that are tall and dense, but then it's the in-between stuff that's really fascinating. So either light grazing or short-term grazing where you just sort of go in and punch some holes in that structure a little bit to open up some space or provide some runways, or what I love the best is that recovery period after a long period of intensive grazing. So a lot of our management will graze a site for most of a season or an entire season, but then it doesn't get grazed for the next year and a half, 2 years. And those dominant grasses that at least here sort of seem to compete more strongly than everybody else, those have to take a break because they get grazed hard enough that they're not dominant now for a year and a half, which means that everybody else gets to come out and play. You have these big wildflower parties. You've got this incredible structure of short, sparse grass but tall flowers. And whether you're looking at invertebrates or brood rearing cover for quail and pheasants and grouse, there's no other way to create some of those habitats, I think, without grazing. So grazing in the hands of somebody who wants to be creative and who has habitat objectives in mind can be a really, really great approach.
Man, that's fantastic. So you've mostly focused on grazing cattle for the prairie's sake. when you're doing that, can you talk about wildlife during and before, during, and after the grazing? Like what's going on in there?
Yeah, for sure. And to clarify, you're right. I mean, our main objective on our sites, the Nature Conservancy lands that we manage, but also on my own family land, by the way, the main objective is to create the most biodiversity we can. But we're also trying to do that in ways that can translate to private lands where that's only one of many objectives, right? You also have to make a living off the land. And there's no reason that those things are not compatible. I just want to make sure that's clear. Like the stuff we're doing is not so out of the world that a farmer or rancher couldn't do the same thing and still make money. So that's important. In terms of wildlife, the thing that's great about, at least the way we're thinking about grazing, is that within a management unit, whether that's a four pasture rotation or one large pasture or whatever it is, but within one area that we're focusing on, we can create the habitat that just about any wildlife species would need. And then as we move that management around, those wildlife species can just sort of follow the type of management, the type of habitat structure that they like. So we can make everybody happy, we think. And if you can't move, whether that's because you're a plant or you're something that just doesn't move very well, you might have to sort of like thrive and then retreat a little bit within to yourself in those years where the management's not ideal, but the good stuff is coming back around pretty quick, and so you can sort of ride the lows and live on the highs. And just the more and more data we collect and the more observations we find, like we don't see any wildlife species that aren't compatible with some kind of grazing thrown into the mix, right? So
Oh,
even if they're the wildlife like a Henslow sparrow, for example, Henslow sparrows really like to be in the tall, dense stuff with a lot of thatch. They're not over where the grazing is happening right now, but they're in those areas that we grazed a couple years ago that are in that rest period, and they're doing great.
It's really
So
interesting.
yeah, everybody can sort of survive in that mix.
do you see any
Well,
way forward? Let's say you're not going absolute. Hey, I need the most poundage possible on my beef every single day. Let's say you're that's not your mindset, but you still have bills to pay, so it needs to be
Yeah, yeah.
viable. It's not casual. Do you see any way where 50% of the land could be natives and that still 50% of someone's farm could be natives and that still be a viable grazing option to be a primarily, if not a fully grazed operation?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I would say that. I mean, in Nebraska, like in Nebraska Sandhills, for example, right? It's 12 million
hmm
acres of remnant prairie, the
yeah,
largest in the
yep.
continent, second largest in the world, whatever. Blah blah blah. It's a great place. It's all grazed, and it's all grazed by
hmm
ranchers who are making a living.
And
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 so it's
that
all
and they
remnant prairie.
send
It's
and
very
people
diverse.
send
It's
their
in yeah.
people send their cows out there to be finished on that prairie.
Oh, it's great, right? And it's all terrific habitat wise. Plant diversity is doing
hmm
really well. There's some invasive plants in the wetlands and things, but overall, man, it's an amazing landscape. And it's managed for agricultural production. It's managed for livestock production.
That's a great point.
And I would say that the grazing strategies that we're using on our land with the Nature Conservancy in Nebraska, you're not really giving up much, if anything, in terms of like poundage or livestock production. But it all depends on how you're marketing, right? If you're marketing like a lot of the holistic or the intensive grazing, fast rotation sort of things, the marketing of that is you're trying to sell a lot of animals, and so you're trying to bump your stocking rate up, but your individual gain per animal is not usually as good as something that's different than that. That's fine, but what we're doing, we're probably getting the same pounds of beef per acre, but on fewer animals that are making more weight gains per animal. And again, there's not a right or wrong there; it's just different objectives. But I mean, to answer your question, there's so much compatibility. It just comes down to maybe tweaking the approach that you're starting with to make sure that you're providing a broader array of habitat.
Yeah.
I think most ranchers or most farmers, when they think about grazing and habitat, they think, well, I need to graze a little bit less to leave some more habitat, right? I hear that all the time. But
hmm
habitat comes in all sort of shapes and sizes, right? So you can
Yeah,
have, I
true.
mean, that heavily grazed, very short, open habitat. That's great for some species of birds, small mammals, insects. And then those dense areas are important, but so are the intermediate things where it's
Yeah.
patchy and messy. That messiness is where most of these species live. So when I talk to landowners about what we're learning, most of what I'm doing is just saying, tell me about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, and let's talk about things that maybe you could just nudge something a little bit or change your frequency or your duration in a certain pasture just to add a little bit more wildlife value to it.
I assume you know Pete Berthelsen from the
Sure.
Conservation Bluebird. Yeah, he talks about that. It's like, hey, look, we're not going to have a 400 species prairie on every acre, but we could be a little better on millions of acres. And the reason, and I've said this to the listeners, the reason I harp on grazing and pasture land, I see it as the most viable, and I look at the prairie market a lot. Not just like as a from a sales point, but just like how can we get more prairie on the ground, and then trying to take in legislation, trying to take in economics and what people want, and the care that's happening, like what people want in the cities, what they're willing to pay for food. I see pasture as by far the possibility for biggest needle mover of getting prairie on the ground. I mean, I think we're talking to the tunes of tens of millions of acres we could move across the Midwest and into the South and Southeast, but. Um, and so I get actually a lot of calls now because we've been harping on it for a while. Like, hey, that sounds interesting. I want to try out 5 acres. And if you're in the Midwest, and let's say you can be mixed prairie or tall grass prairie, whatever kind of prairie, and based on what you've observed, and the people, someone calls me and says, hey, what would you do in Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, maybe Nebraska? What would you put on the ground for your cattle? What are you telling them?
What I tell them is, well, first of all, what's your objective, right? If your objective is purely livestock production, that's going to be a different answer. But if your answer is, I want to do something that is, optimizing or close to it for livestock production, but I also really care about pollinators and birds and all these other things.
That's
I
where
think,
most people are. Most people are,
yeah,
hey, I need it to make sense, but I want
yep.
to help the pollinators while we do
Then
it.
my answer is you put as many plant species out there as you can,
Okay.
and you let them sort themselves out, and then you graze in a way that you know, uh, will make you the money you need to make, but also just make sure you're keeping track of whether all those species are still there.
That's an
You know,
intentional process.
yeah, I mean, we have sites that we planted, 25 years ago with a seed mix of, 150 to 200 plant species. We've been grazing those for 20 years at stocking rates that are the same or higher than our neighbors. And we still have all
Wow.
those plant species there. Our species diversity
Wow.
is just as good as it was. And we're creating a lot of wildlife habitat along the way. And it's not that we know anything magical that nobody else knows. It's just that, again, there's a lot of ways to do it well. And as long as you're keeping an eye on whether things are still there or not, that gives you the ability to tweak and adjust and keep working. But the more plant diversity you start out with, the
Yeah.
more resilient that plant community is going to be. It's going to produce in a dry year, in a wet year, after a fire, after you graze it hard. There's always going to be something that's responding well. So there's no downside other than the cost of that initial restoration process.
Well, and
And that's a limiting factor. Everybody's got to work out for themselves. But man, if you can make
yeah.
that initial investment, it'll pay itself back over time.
I've we in the past we had sold like these cool season pasture. We don't actually get called for them that often, but they're not. I mean, they're maybe 60, or sorry, they're maybe 30% cheaper. But very few people are ripping up 100 acres, and doing it. So 30% over 20 acres, it's like $1,000 or less, and usually it's not a huge difference in investment. Then, but okay, so everyone listening, I am now committed. I'm gonna make a native pasture deluxe mix. We have a native pasture mix. I'm gonna take Chris' advice. I'm gonna throw a lot of stuff in there, and we're gonna see how it goes. So, what is something that you think? Okay, you need to make sure these species are in there.
Um, that's a really good question. I would say I mean, see, these are the plant species that I see cows seek out the most in our prairies. And I'll give you the list off the top of my head. But, things like prairie clovers, perennial sunflowers, silphiums like
Hmm.
rosinweed and compass plant, um, milkweed, common and showy milkweed, get
Hmm.
grazed as heavily as anything else in our pastures. Cows love those things.
Oh man, we
Um,
had a guy say that on this podcast, and we posted that online, and he got killed in the comments for saying that.
I've got the research to back it up. It's published.
Wow.
And so not only have I seen it for 30 years, I've got data that we've got a graduate student just for that reason because I got the same response. And we said, okay, well, fine, we'll do the science. And we are so past that now. So now the question is, how do we manage grazing in a way that we don't, graze too hard and lose too many milkweeds? And that
Sure.
balance is really tricky.
That
But
is awesome to hear.
Yeah.
oh
Jeremy just did a big old fist pump right there.
Yeah.
it's no,
That's crazy. That video got like 750,000 views or
Oh,
something.
well, way over 1 million views across
it's over 1
platforms.
million.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
people just like
Yeah,
hammered
it
him
was
in the
like
comments.
it was a trigger thing or something. But
it's so
most,
funny
but
that-
I'd say at least half the people were just intrigued by it. And we're like, wow,
yeah.
that's really amazing.
Here's two things that are fun. One, there's a difference between milkweeds in the eastern, like east of the Rockies versus west of the Rockies. The milkweed species west of the Rockies tend to have a higher toxicity level. But even there, that toxicity level is not to the point where like a cow is going to eat a milkweed plant and keel over and die. It's just not the way it works. East
That
of the
makes me
Rockies.
think of that old phrase. That's got enough whatever in it to kill a cow.
Right. Yeah. But east of the Rockies, like there's very little to worry about. And I mean, if you were force feeding your cattle nothing but whorled milkweed, for example, because whorled milkweed has the higher toxicity
Okay.
of the species, at least in Nebraska,
Oh.
that's the one that's sort of higher. But like I see cattle eating them all the time. They just tend to eat the flowers off or hit the tips. They're not doing what they do with common and showy, which is mowing them down to the ground. I mean, the only showy and common milkweed that bloom in our prairies are the ones that don't have any cattle access at all that year. And we're trying to figure out like how many years of rest or what kind of rest periods do you need to sort of grow a milkweed population in a pasture.
Interesting.
It's a huge question. But
Yeah.
the fact that they don't eat milkweeds is a complete myth. Like it's just not true. So yeah, I will stand up to anybody who wants to fight me on that one.
Wow. And I mean, we do the same thing with sugar. I mean, it'll kill
come
us.
at me,
you know?
haters.
Yeah. Oh, I'm making a reel out of it. You better believe it. Okay, last question, and then I'll get off the grazing train. Riley's going to be real excited that we went this way. But why the heck don't cows eat hoy vervain? They just don't. I mean, it's just
No, they
left in
don't.
every pasture everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't eat it. I mean, I would guess it's a combination of taste and texture. But the fact that they don't actually leads to some really important problems because people see it and then they assume that that's an aggressive plant, right? And then we've lost a lot of good prairies in Nebraska because people have gone out and broadcast sprayed a pasture for things like hoary vervain that are just reacting to the fact that you're grazing your pasture too hard for too long, right? And western ragweed's another one. There's a bunch of those plants that either cows won't eat, and so they expand because they're the only thing not getting grazed, or things that respond really well to the weak grass stand and flourish, and it makes it look like they're aggressive, and they're just opportunistic. They're just saying, well, if you're going to eat all my competition, I'm going to do great here, and I'll be real happy. And then people get afraid that it's taken over their pasture, and then you spray it, and all you're doing is killing all the good stuff and opening up even more space for plants like that to come back. So it's either going to be the same plant or another one that's very similar that's going to fill that same space because the space is the problem. And what I encourage people to do, by the way, in that situation is if you have something like that, build a small exclosure, put a couple cattle panels and some T-posts out and fence a little area out for a while and see what happens. And if that hoary vervain like continues to take over the world, then maybe we'll have a conversation. But what always happens is the grass comes roaring back, and it just shows you that it's a grazing problem, not a plant problem.
Wow.
So you got grazing, and then you got mowing, and you got burning, and those are really the three main tools for prairie management. And we recently talked with Dr. Kaiser about mowing as well, and he talked about the importance of I can't remember what his exact term was for it, but not mowing below essentially the growth
50% of the leaves.
I think he said a good rule is like 8 inches above the ground is where you should mow. And I've actually started to apply that as a lot of our production fields get mowed after harvest just to keep down on annual weed seed and things like that. And I've started to raise the mower up as high as is reasonable to cut, just to try and help the desired species that are in the field to still have. I mean, just because they're done producing seed doesn't mean that that all those plants are done growing. They still have a lot of photosynthesizing tissues that are still, above the ground and working through until the first killing frost. And so I've tried to apply that, but something, and this was not in my email, so I apologize if I catch you off here a little bit, but something I've observed in my own prairie reconstructions is it seems to me that maybe too much mowing is prescribed. Now, if the weed competition that's coming in is non-native invasive plants, I think that's a different story. But a lot of the weed pressure you get in a brand new seeding are annual natives. Things like lamb's quarter, pigweed, smartweed. What's another one, Nick, that I'm missing here?
Amaranth.
Well, that'd be pigweed.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on, Nick, stay with
I'm
us.
sorry, he
There's
just puts
I
me
know
to sleep.
I know I'm thinking of a
Buttonweed,
mare's
velvet
tail. Mare's tail.
Mare's tail, sure.
Oh yeah,
velvet
mare's
leaf,
tail's the big
velvet leaf is not a native, and neither,
Oh, really?
I
I
think
didn't know
not,
that.
I don't think buckwheat, wild buckwheat is either. I don't think. Morning glory is, which is similar, but I think those are two different things. I could be wrong there, but anyways, these annual weeds that people go, ugh, pigweed, ugh, lamb's quarter, ugh, mare's tail. I'm wondering if when we mow so aggressively because we start seeing that stuff pop up, the pigweed's back. I just mowed it 3 weeks ago and here it is again. I wonder if we're hurting the diversity of that prairie up front because you have those little tiny rosettes or the little tiny sprouts of the New England aster, maybe, that's coming up and gets a haircut again, and it's just losing so much energy in its very early life to that frequent mowing to get rid of those native annuals. Do you wonder? I mean, should we almost view these native annuals as like a cover crop or a nurse crop that's helping hold the place of in the soil for these upcoming native perennials that will eventually, because I mean you don't see amaranth out in a stand of big blue stem. It's not there. I mean, not that the seeds aren't there, but it's out competed by that perennial. At least that's been my experience. Or like a mature prairie, you just don't see a lot of maybe around the edges where there's more disturbed soil, but I mean, do you think there's some value in holding our horses a little bit on the mowing early on and being patient for those perennials to get established? Or nope, it should be as soon as it gets knee high, mow it down again. What do you think?
Boy, there's a lot there. So let's start. Let's start with. No, this is great. So let's start with mowing and restorations.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I think that a lot of those short-lived plants, those annuals and biennials, do play a really important role while we're waiting for our prairie plants that we've seeded in there to get started. And the key, I think, is how much competition are they providing for things like light, which I would say mostly is the one that we care about. Maybe water to some extent. But if you get down on the ground and look, there's a surprising amount of dappled light usually hitting the ground underneath those stands of even very tall plants. Out here we get annual sunflowers that are 10 to 15 feet tall sometimes in a new planting. We don't mow those weeds. Like on the Platte River in Nebraska, for example, we never mow weeds because we've tried it and we didn't see any difference. And so why would we spend the fuel and time doing it? That changes as you go further east, right? Because you have, in Iowa, you have more productive soils than we have, especially in central Nebraska. And so there are times where that weed cover can be a significant impediment to establishment, and you should be ready to do something about it. But I don't think it necessarily should be the automatic step. And if you do, then I agree that mowing high makes sense. And, you start out early in the season, you could mow a little lower, and as the season goes on, you mow higher and higher, and that's all fine. But I think it should be aimed at not getting rid of those weeds, but just managing that light availability. And that can be really hard to judge because you don't know how much light those little plants need.
Right.
And so it gets to something that I think is really important restoration wise anyway, which is that if you've got the ability to do it, let's say you have 100 acres you want to restore. This is hard within conservation projects. You sign a contract and you've got to plant it. But if there's any way to break that up into pieces, the absolute ideal strategy is to do a couple acres the first year, learn from it, do a couple more acres the next year, learn from it, and by year 3 or 4, you sort of know what's going to work at your particular site, and then you do 50 acres, and then you do another 50
Mm.
acres. And there's so A, you get to learn as you go and make sure that before you invest in the big project, you got the little stuff figured out. You know, what are my weeds? What are the management that works? All that. But also, every year, restoration establishes different just because of the year effect, right? The rainfall or whatever's happening that year that we don't really understand, by the way. And so you get to take advantage of that heterogeneity and you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's sort of a tangent. Like that's hard for people to do, but if you can, oh boy, it's the way to go.
Sure.
But what I would say is if you have that opportunity, mow weeds on a little bit of it and don't mow weeds on another part and just see if there's a difference in that next year or two. And that'll teach you a lot so that the next time you do this sort of
Hmm.
project, it makes a difference. Because again, it's I've had this for me many times that even though we don't mow, there's lots of times where I've come real close. Because I walk
Yeah.
out there and I'm in a chest high stand of bristly foxtail and I can't see my feet.
Yeah.
And yet the next year it looks great, right? Without doing
Yeah.
any mowing at all. Um, so the short story there on that second part of your question is yes, I agree. I think mowing shouldn't be the automatic decision we make. I think we should be flexible with it, um, and do some experimentation to see what works in different places. The other thing I wanted to
Yeah.
bounce back to was right at the beginning you were talking about how low you can mow
Hmm.
and without affecting the growing point and all those sorts of things. It comes down to your objectives, right? So when we're doing grazing management on an established restoration or on a remnant prairie, we all often mow right down to the soil almost.
Hmm.
And sometimes we'll do that because we want to attract grazing. So we do a lot of patch burn grazing, where we'll take a big pasture and we'll burn a portion of it, and the cattle focus on that burned area, lets everything else rest, and you burn another area the next year. It works. It's a really cool way
Okay.
to
Yeah.
manage it. But in years where we don't burn because we can't burn or because whatever's happening, sometimes we'll go out there and we'll use haying equipment. We'll hay it, and the grazing pattern is the same. And so we're mowing it right down to the ground, and then the cows come in and graze it for like a season afterwards. And so we're keeping everything very short. It doesn't kill the prairie to do that, right?
Hmm.
In fact, what it does is it creates a broader array of habitat structure, like we talked about earlier. So all the things that like that short structure have it, but you do need to give it time to recover. That's a longer time to recover than you might give it if you mowed it at 8 or 12 or whatever inches. So it just comes down to what you're trying to do, right? If you want to maintain the constant production of whatever species it is that you care about, mowing high probably makes sense because you're not going to set it back. But I just want to make clear, I mean, these plants and prairies are super resilient, and mowing them really short every few years and then giving them plenty of time to recover is not a terrible thing. In fact, it can be a really good thing.
That's great information.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me feel better on both fronts, I guess, as far as mowing isn't doing as much damage as I feared, but also it's okay to let some of those annual natives persist. I think if you have a small plot, under an acre, it's just super valuable to go in and this is something I learned from Carol actually was just you can look at a field and you can say, wow, that field's got a lot of weeds in it. I got to get all those weeds out. Or you could look at that field and say, that field's got a lot of weeds in it. I'm getting rid of the foxtail, and then next year you take on the next thing or whatever and try and be, hyper focused with what you're after. And I think that can make a huge difference too, as opposed to just always dropping the mower deck on it, several times a growing season. So,
I mean,
yeah,
and just one, get it back to objectives again. One objective in some sites is you want it to make it look nice, right? Because
right. Yeah.
either that's what you care about most, which is fine if that's what you care about, or like you're working with a school or you're working in a community area where like tolerance for weeds is not there.
Right.
That's great. Mow your weeds and manage it because that's what you need to do to meet that objective.
Yeah.
But if you don't need to do that, like there's nothing wrong with foxtail and mare's tail and lambsquare. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those. Those are good habitat plants.
Yeah.
They're not ultra competitive. Your prairie plants are going to fight them out and get rid of them anyway. And so you can save yourself a lot of time and hassle just by sort of changing your tolerance levels
Yeah.
and not looking down on them as much as you might. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I
again,
would
there's no judgment if you care, if making it look nice quickly is the most important thing, that's fine.
Yeah. Although I would add this caveat to that. I think it's always important to ask ourselves who is the prairie for,
Oh yeah.
and why is it why is it worth me planting this prairie at all? And that helps us answer some of the questions of ew, tick trefoil. I hate how it gets stuck to my socks. Ew, Canada wild rye that gets stuck in my dog's nose. It's like we can. I don't know. I think we can have it our way too much, and sometimes you'll see on habitat forums or discussion boards or whatever, people always want to kill everything all the time, and it's like, well, you got to remember that first year prairie is disturbed soil. You just nuked it all with a herbicide, or you had some tillage involved, you burned. You have disturbed soil. Guess what? All of the annual weeds thrive in disturbed soil, and so
It's a miracle anything's around to be able to live there. You know what I mean? We just
It was
interviewed
working.
Lou.
That's,
Oh yeah,
that's what it's supposed to do.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just it's kind of a new pet peeve of mine that I want to people far more credible than myself, such as you, Chris. I want to hear you guys weigh in on it. I think I've already made Laura talk to me about it.
Well, you know what it reminds
I'm-
me of is it reminds me of people that put native plants in their yard and then get mad when something eats them.
yes, yes,
Because it's a big question, like, well, what are you doing it for? Why are you using native
Right.
plants? Because if you're using native plants because it's good for pollinators and wildlife and native insects and things,
yep,
like having something eat it is a success. Like you did it.
right,
You gave them what they wanted and they're using it. That's awesome. And if
exactly.
it makes it look a little uglier, then you need to look at what your objectives are. Because again, if your objective is to make something pretty, there's nothing wrong with that. But be clear about that, right? But if you're doing it for conservation, having those plants get eaten by something is a win. That's
Yeah.
that's what we're aiming for. That's great.
Yeah, you're getting an A on your test when
Yeah.
that happens.
I think I heard you, or maybe I read a blog. You've talked about like, hey guys, we're aiming for beauty too much with our prairies,
Yeah.
and instead of having the tolerance for like green, what you would call weedy,
Messiness.
yeah, messiness,
Yeah, no, I wrote one of the first blog posts I ever wrote was about calendar prairies, which was a term that a friend of mine here uses all the time. To be like the prairie that is really showy and it looks kind of the same way every time, and the trap there is that you sort of get into this mode of, well, if it doesn't look like that every year, I'm doing something wrong. And then you get into doing the same management every year and it starts to stagnate, which is never good in ecology. And what's much more interesting, if you can stand it, is that prairie should look different every year, right? You should always have new things happen and new management strategies. And some years it should be tall and shaggy with a lot of flowers, and some years it should be short and sparse, and some years it should be messy and patchy. And it's all good. It's a win in all those cases. But no, you're right. I think people can get trapped into this prairie should look this way at its peak, and so let's try to keep it at its peak all the time.
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I think so much of that just goes back to and part of it's the marketing of prairie too, right? You so much of when you market somebody on an idea, rarely are you trying to get them to go from A to Z and upon first meeting. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesmen that end up in jail. You gotta get them from A to B, right? Which is your current vacuum cleaner.
That's funny.
It doesn't get the corners of your steps very well, and this one will. And so sometimes though we try to go A to Z. Look, all that beautiful landscaping, Bermuda grass that you got going right there in your yard, that could be prairie dropseed, that and that should be replaced right away. And then you could just have these 3 clumps of grass right here and it'll look so beautiful. But really what needs to change is the whole concept of how we view what is beautiful and what what good landscaping does look like. Not just this simple replacement of yank out all the non-natives and in the very hole in the dirt where you yanked it out, put a native plug in its place. I mean, yeah, that gets us somewhere along the spectrum of better for sure, but much better would be if a whole diverse prairie
If their
with
whole mind was changed.
a lot of biomass, less mulch, more habitat for invertebrates, more food sources for pollinators, and this is the really scary one: a place to live for the small mammals and birds.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you know
and
you know who's
snakes.
to blame for setting that cultural standard? It's those dang photographers. It's those photographers that we go out there as with our cameras and we make the prairie look as pretty as we can with all the flowers. And everybody's like, "Oh, that's what a prairie is supposed to look like." So, well, that's
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
some prairies
Yeah,
look
right.
like that.
Right.
But
Well,
I blame the
it's probably the
photographers. I
seed
think it's their
salesman
fault.
too. It's probably a 50-50.
Whoa, hey, what?
Seed salesman.
Well, it's hard. It's hard. Look, it is hard to sell something and be like,
Yeah.
it's going to be kind of ugly for like half the year. I hope you're chill with that. You know,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's hard. That's hard.
Yeah.
We got a couple topics that would just like be the biggest shame if we didn't get to them, and we're already almost an hour
I hope
in.
fire. I hope fire is in that list, Nicholas.
Well, we got to talk about your I forget what it's called. You took a picture of a meter of a
Oh, it's
1
my square meter
meter
project. Yeah.
Yes.
Can
Tell
we
us
end
about
on that, Nick? While we're on the management thing, let's talk fire,
Okay.
and then we get.
Yeah.
So
okay,
so
good.
something, and Jeremy is coming on again. Hopefully this fall. I think he's going to be in the area to talk. Jeremy French from Southeastern Grasslands Partnership, right? Isn't that what it's called?
Southeast Grasslands Institute. Southeastern Grasslands Institute. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, Jeremy's great.
So, yeah, he's an awesome guy, wealth of knowledge. But we hear often, and we're hearing more about the importance of burning at the correct time, and I think step one is don't just everybody light it up in March, and we know that leads to a lot of problems with cool season non-native grasses. But then you start hearing about, well, actually, if you want to help the forbs, you burn in the fall, and then you start hearing about, well, maybe fall is not quite the right term, maybe late summer, and then you start hearing about dormant season burns, and then so I guess do you have kind of a rule of thumb? I'm sure it depends on, like much of our conversation, what is the outcome you're after.
Yes.
And that's not going to be the same everywhere. It's not going to be the same in the shortgrass prairie out west as what it is in the tallgrass prairie of the Midwest. It's going to be different problems you're managing for, and you're not going to have the same problems every year that you're going to be managing for. They could be one problem you're trying to solve in 2025 and a completely different one by 2027. So I imagine that's the upfront consideration. But do you have any general rules of thumb that you kind of go with based on some of the different things that burning can achieve for a prairie?
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. It all comes down to objectives. And I mean, if I'm managing for biodiversity, which is that's the lens that I look at things through, burning at the same time every year is always going to be a negative. Like there's always going to be a downside to doing that. But it doesn't mean it's the wrong choice. It just means that you want to be aware of what the downside is and then make an educated decision, right? So for example, there's a lot of prairies in the east, and I would say, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin as examples, where sort of the dominant management strategy for these small prairies is to burn them off in the dormant season, February, March, early March, depending on where they're at, and just do that either every year or most years. And what they get out of that is a really pretty prairie. It's a very calendar prairie. And like, again, if that's your objective, there's nothing wrong with that. You're dealing with this small little site. You're never going to have prairie chickens. You're not going to have a lot of these other things. But there is a downside. And the downside is that especially if it's an isolated prairie from other sites, anything overwintering in that vegetation dies. right? And so that's a pretty big downside, I think, if you're managing for biodiversity. Plus the fact that you're always favoring the same species. So there's going to be a set of plants, a set of animals that thrive best in that early dormant or late dormant season fire, and they're going to win every year, which means other things are going to lose.
Such a great point.
So you have to know that, right?
Yeah.
Woody
Write that
plants
down,
is a
Nick.
big consideration, right? And what's interesting with woody plants is woody plants respond to fire season very differently in different places. You know, what Jeremy talks about and what he sees in the southeast in terms of what a summer fire does or what a spring fire does can be very different than what I see here in Nebraska. And so the key there is is woody plant management something you're trying to do with fire? And if it is, you might have to just play with some things to see how it reacts at your site. And that's going to depend on what kind of woody plants you're dealing with and what your soils are like and all those sorts of things. To me, the ideal situation is if you can help it, don't burn the entire site at a time, right? Especially again, if it's a small isolated site, because no matter what time of year you're going to burn, you're going to have some negative impacts. You're going to kill some things in that fire. And if you can burn a third of it at a time, then you've got a much better chance of somebody surviving somewhere else and recolonizing. If you're part of a prairie, like if everybody around you also has prairie and they're not burning the same time you are, you can burn your whole site and feel okay about it. But if it's not the case, I would be really careful about burning it all. And then the second thing is to shift the timing around, right? So just like we would with grazing or mowing or anything else, you don't want the same species to win every year. And so you burn in the early spring, that's going to favor some plant and animal species. You burn in the summer, it's going to favor some plant and animal species. If you do it consistently, you start to have too many winners and your losers end up disappearing. If you mix it up, then everybody gets to win sometimes, and that's good. So that's the sort of my broad approach. Beyond that, though, it really is what's one of the fascinating things. It's a mystery right now that I don't know anybody who has an answer to it. Is why, if we do a March burn in Nebraska, for example, does it favor grass dominance? Because it does. Like we see, if we burn in March or April, our grasses go crazy, and we get this wave of head high, very dense grass, and our forbs start to diminish, especially if we do it repeatedly. Where in a place like Wisconsin or Illinois, if you burn at that same time of year, it favors forbs. I don't understand that. And so I that's why I hesitate to say this is when you should burn, because you should figure out what it does on your site. But what I do think is standard, and what I think applies everywhere, is the more you can mix it up, the better you're going to be. If that diversity of wildlife is what you care about. And again, don't burn off a whole patch if it's isolated from other sites. Those are the two things that I think are really important.
Yeah, that clears up a lot for me and gets me going down the right path on that. I love the idea too of allowing room for experimentation.
Yeah.
I think that so much. You've probably seen that countless times because you're one of the rare people who gets a lot of the research hours in, but then also has the boots on the ground experience to go with it. Because so often, I used to be a biology teacher in a previous career, and you could learn a scientific principle from a textbook, and then you would end up maybe seeing that principle supposedly playing out in real life and realize it's a little oversimplified how it's written in the textbook, And
But here's the other thing with fire is that fire doesn't have to be a standalone practice. And by the way, I would argue, and I have argued with other people about this, I don't think it's crucial. Like you can manage a prairie very well without fire. A prairie doesn't die because of fire. I don't know of any species that disappears if you don't use fire. Fire can be an easy way to manage for some of that stuff and maybe better, especially at scale. But like our family prairie that we have here, I've never burned it, and I'm very happy with what's happening out there. And I find other ways to manage woody species, or I find other ways to manage thatch or some of the things that I would get from fire. And I don't say that to minimize fire. Like fire is a cool thing. It's a really important part of prairies, but it's not so essential that you should make sure that it happens or you're a failure, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is that
that's a really
combining
big.
fire.
That's a bold take, Chris.
Hey, again,
I like it.
I'll
love it.
stand
I'm
up
here
and
for
defend
it.
it. Because I've had that conversation with fire ecologists, right? Like people who really do care about fire and they study fire and that's their career. And I'm not, again, sometimes I'm pushing the buttons for fun, but I'm not saying that you shouldn't use fire. And I use fire all the time at work. Like it's a
Yeah.
big piece of
Yep.
our management. But I also get the impression that people feel like they're doing something wrong if they're not using
Yeah, that
fire.
is
And
very
that's not
true.
necessarily the case. It's just not. So, and then, but the other thing is combining it with other treatments. So, for example, if you're managing dogwood or sumac in a prairie, going out and burning one time a year, depending on where you're at, might make it worse. It might, knock it back temporarily, but not for a long enough time that you feel like you've really gained much. Sometimes burning in the summer in some places seems to have a bigger effect. Some places it doesn't. In Nebraska, we've done summer fires and our dogwood just rips right back out of the ground and it looks like it did a year ago. But combining two treatments within the same season can have a real strong effect on those plants. And fire can be a really important one of those. So, for example, we've got a little pilot trial we're doing up at the Niobrara Valley Preserve in Nebraska, so northern Sandhill, central Nebraska, where we're trying different ways to suppress sumac height and density. And mowing it once or burning it once, like a couple of years later, it's like you never did anything. But if we mow it in June and then mow it in August, boy, that suppresses it for a long time. Like that double whammy is a big deal. We did a burn we did a mowing treatment in June and then came back and burned it late November.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it was okay, but it came back pretty fast. Compared to we did a mowing in August and then burned it in November, and it looks just like the June and August mowing. Like that double whammy was huge. Now,
Wow.
why? I don't know. We're still
Yeah.
figuring that out. We're still
Yeah.
experimenting. But the point is that using fire as a standalone is fine, but using it in combination with other things. I mean, I already talked about grazing, right? Using fire as a way to focus grazing in one place and not others is really helpful. Cattle graze, bison graze very differently in a burned area than an unburned area. So you can use fire in other creative ways and combine it with other things.
It's
Yeah,
it's
I
interesting
love
because
that
the
take.
double whammy we talked about quite a bit with Adam Ledvina. He's a goat guy. He's a Kiko goat. So right, they graze and then they come back shortly after, like a month later, and they graze again. But I got a question, and maybe I don't know, maybe you have research behind it, but it might just be preference for you. You got a prairie. You know that you're going to have it for 30 years, and you can pick either grazing or fire as an intentional tool to use whenever you want. But if you use both, you go to jail.
Okay. That's an easy
Which one would you pick?
Grazing.
Really? Wow.
Grazing for sure. And here's
Wow.
why. And it's not that
real
grazing is better than fire, but if that's the only thing I get to do, it's so much more flexible, right? I can do a low intensity grazing treatment where the cows are out there just picking off the tips of some of their favorite plants and nothing else. I can do a high intensity. I can leave them out there for a month or a season or a day. Where fire, you burn it and either burns or it doesn't burn.
Yeah.
If you're really good and you can use humidity and things to your advantage, you might be able to get a patchy burn done. But it's really it's an on or off. It's a binary thing, right? Where grazing, you can just do a lot of different things with it, and
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about what the weather's doing, whether my fire chief is feeling good, whether the governor has put a burn ban on. Like I can graze as long as I have access to cattle. I can graze when I need to graze it. So yeah, that's an easy answer for that particular hypothetical. But again, I'm not saying that fire is bad or grazing is
Yeah.
bad or anything. It's just in that
Yeah.
example,
That's
that's
just a lot of pros. Yeah.
Ken and I have been experimenting with the idea of not experimenting with tossing around the idea of rest years on farmland. Now, that's a huge deal. If you go biblical terms, it's 1 out of every 7 years. So if that's 1/7, that's 15% of your fields are out of production.
You're talking about row
so-
crops here.
No, well, I'm not talking
Yeah,
about CRP. I'm talking about prairie production
Talking
fields.
monocropped fields.
Yep,
though.
Gotcha. Okay.
not row crop, but monocrop, like
Yeah.
prairie fields. And I am, because our big blue stem, our little blue stem, it's known. Little blue stem's known. It'll give you seed 3-4 years, and then the seed kind of fizzles out. The great grass looks amazing, but the seed kind of fizzles out. Big blue stem was more like 2 decades, and then it really started fizzled out, and we couldn't do anything to get it back. And I am curious if you have any thoughts on letting land rest, in terms of and it that I know of. I don't know of anyone that does it except for some grazing. There was one gentleman we talked to that does it a little bit with grazing, but I just think it'd be interesting.
I think if we were talking about a prairie, either a restored prairie or a remnant prairie, then I would say absolutely rest is an important piece of that, right? It's the same thing we talk about. If you burn it every year, or you graze it every year, or whatever, you have winners and losers, and you don't want to let that continue forever. And so, giving a break from whatever you do is always a good thing there. In a monoculture system like that, I think what you're probably fighting against is at some point it's the same reason that we rotate crops, right? In a row crop system or in a garden, you move your crops around because you don't want to have a buildup of pathogens or parasites or predators or whatever it is that you're trying to manage for. And my guess is that that's what's occurring in those systems where your monoculture just stops producing. Is you've got a buildup of something that's hitting it, and because it's all the same thing, whatever it is gets really good at its job, and it's got everything it needs, and it just sort of does it, right? I don't know that here's a guess. I don't know that a rest period would have much of effect on that because I don't think the rest is going to change your nematode population or your fungal population or anything like that, right? If it was something where the treatment was that you were mowing it short and taking a lot of energy out of it, and you did that every year, then yes, you would want a rest period because you're sucking the energy out. But if by rest you mean we're just not going to harvest the seed from it that year, I don't see where that would have that much of effect because the plant itself is not affected by whether you take its seed at the end of the year.
Well,
Because
we
it's
would also
done at
not
that
be.
time.
We wouldn't be manicuring the weeds. Like we wouldn't go in. On our wildflowers, most of the fields we mow in between the rows. We wouldn't do any of that. But I mean, you're making it seem like you don't think it'd be that huge of a deal on in terms of. Now it'd be interesting wildlife wise. It
Oh,
would
sure,
probably
that's
really
different.
boost. But I that wasn't really what I was thinking. It was more just subsoil and plant. Um,
My
yeah.
hunch is that it wouldn't make a big difference, but it's just a hunch.
Interesting. Well, that hunt it's hard to it's hard to gamble 15% of your income every year, if especially if the expert is hunching in the opposite
Well,
direction.
yeah, but if you really wanted to do it, the easy way to do that is take a couple acres and don't treat them. Give
Hmm.
rest a couple acres in one field and do that on all your fields, and then see if you see a difference one way or the other. You could learn pretty easily without gambling 15%,
Yeah.
right? Gamble
You know,
gamble a fifth of 1%.
Yeah.
you know what? This just came to my mind, Ken. Especially our grasses. It'd be interesting, quote unquote, rest year is to graze them 1 out of 7 years, or 1 out of every 5 years, and then you got some production on them, but you're just throwing up a portable fence around. Anyway, that was
Or
more of a.
just hay it. I mean,
Oh yeah,
if you don't
yeah,
want the
yeah.
infrastructure, just cut it for hay once out of however many
Well,
years.
and some of those like really old land use, techniques like fallow ground and things, they probably weren't. They probably weren't the hope, the aim, the goal, the objective was not just more and better crops.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably less tillage on the soil. Whereas our Indian grass field never gets tilled. You know what I mean? It's just it's Indian grass. It's growing there. It gets burned, but it's not tilled. And I mean, sometimes we'll use a chisel plow on our big blue stem to kind of stimulate the plants to produce better. But that's not an every year thing either. So I think probably the hope with the fallow ground was more of a soil conservation aim would be my guess than a
Yeah.
production increase.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you're working with a monoculture, you're sort of fighting nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nature doesn't
Yeah,
work in
absolutely.
monocultures, and so it doesn't
100%.
mean again, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. It just means that there's challenges that are going to come along with it.
Absolutely.
And in this case, yeah, I would experiment. I would experiment on a small scale because who knows? Maybe there's
Yeah.
something that we just haven't thought of, but I don't think you need to do 15%.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
before we get to the main event, Ken and I always argue about when we're going to talk about the most exciting part of the thing.
Yeah, we haven't shown
People
any
should
pictures.
message
You
us.
promised pictures, and we got
That's
nothing.
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
This
yeah.
is the
That's true.
picture
It's
We
just
got
our
to
time.
send
stupid
pictures.
faces in
But
front of
Yes.
everybody.
but
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
before we get to that, I know we made a promise to the listeners. We made a promise to Chris that we would bring up deciduous shrubs, and we would talk about the changing. What would you say? Maybe narrative
Yeah.
around them in prairie. Chris, I look at a prairie and I go, ugh, there's a lot of shrubs in there. That jars me a little bit. And you're saying that maybe I should change. Maybe I should think, oh, that's kind of cool. Look at that diversity.
Yeah, or at least sort of adjust what we think a good prairie can or should look like. I think
Hmm.
across North America, but especially in this part of the world, right? Nebraska, Illinois, Missouri, um, we're just getting woodier prairies. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of those are things like the change in the wildlife browsing community, the fact that we've got a lot of trees all around, and so that makes more trees or shrubs just because they're in the neighborhood. We've fragmented the landscape, so it makes it easier for them to move, and there's a lot of woody edges that didn't used to be there in these grasslands. The biggest driver, we think scientifically, the biggest driver is CO2 in the atmosphere. That the
Hmm.
amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere makes shrubby plants much more competitive than they used to be. And there's tons of research out on that where they've done lab experiments and pumped CO2 in and not in others, and they see how much the root mass expands with higher CO2. And oh, nitrogen deposition, by the way, that's another one. Lots of new species of woody plants that come in that are not native, that don't have their biological controls. I mean, there's this whole raft, but the CO2 really is a major one. But with as land managers, we can control almost none of those factors, right?
Hmm.
As an owner of a 50-acre piece of ground, you're not going to be able to bring elk back and solve the problem. You're not going to be able to change the CO2 in the atmosphere above your 50 acres. Like it's just there. We have to live in the world. And so there's a group of us that have been talking about this now for a while and trying to get the word out that we probably should change the way we think about woody plants in prairies. And I think what it means right now is in some circumstances, the best answer is not eradication or total prevention, right? That we're going to have to live with some woody plants, and it's going to depend on your situation. So if that 50 acres, let's say that 50 acres is clean of shrubs right now, and you don't have a lot of woody plants in the neighborhood, then your goal could be, I want to keep all the shrubs and trees out of this 50 acres. And you probably can do it, at least for a while. But if that 50 acres is free of shrubs, but it's surrounded by an entire landscape of woody plants, that's going to be a tough challenge because those plants are just always trying to get in. And so you may be able to do it, but it's going to take a tremendous number of resources to do it. And you should just think about, like, do I have those resources to spend, or do I need to spend some of those resources other places? And then a more dire circumstance or drastic or dramatic is, if you've got that 50 acres and you've got a fair number of shrubs already, and the surrounding landscape is full of shrubs, like eradication is just probably not going to happen, right? There's some great research out of Kansas that shows that once and one of those woody plants like dogwood, for example, have come into a pasture, even if you get rid of it, it's sort of changed the environment in a way that it favors it to come back in. And things like fire, we talked about fire, in the Flint Hills of Kansas, they see that if you burn every year or every 2 years, you can probably keep those woody plants from invading. Anything less frequent than that, the plants come in. If you burn every 3 years, those shrubs are coming in like crazy.
Yeah.
But once the shrubs are there, even burning every year doesn't get rid of the shrubs. So once they're there, you sort of got them. And I'm going to say that again. Annual burning doesn't eliminate dogwood and sumac and things like that from a prairie in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And they've been trying it in some cases, for like 25 years of annual burning. And they have the same density of shrubs that they had before. So you can keep them short, but you're not going to get rid of them. So with all that said, what we're trying to say is that we as a group of people working in prairies need to sort of shift our focus a little bit away from just eradication or prevention and also put some energy into how do we manage a shrubby prairie for biodiversity? How do we manage a shrubby prairie for livestock production? Because if we lose livestock production, we're going to lose a lot of prairies, right? So even if you personally don't care about cows, the reason that we still have a lot of prairies in parts of the world like Nebraska is that we can graze them and make money and people can pay their taxes and they keep them instead of plowing them up.
Yep.
So we've got to make them productive. And the thing is, we don't know much about how to do that, right? We've spent very little time thinking about how to manage the height and density of shrubs to allow grasses and wildflowers and pollinator communities to coexist with them, because it's always been this binary thing. It's either we have shrubs and we've failed, or we don't have shrubs and we're winning. And I just don't think we can keep doing that forever. And
I bet
so,
we'd have a lot more bobwhite quail if we had shrubby prairies.
well,
They seem to.
yes and
They
no,
seem to
right?
love those.
We would have to an extent we would, and then we could also get so many shrubs that there's no open grassland areas for them,
Yeah.
and then it's bad. But
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
point. That's exactly the point. Like, we don't know how to answer that question. What's the percent of shrubs across a grassland that's optimal for quail? I don't know. What's the height and density of a sumac patch that still allows a strong pollinator community to persist underneath it? I don't know the answer to that. And nobody does, as far as I know, which means that all of us need to be experimenting with it. We need to be observing. We need to be trying things, like the twice a season mowing or the burn and then mow, or all those sorts of things. Like, learning how those affect the shrubs themselves, but then how that change in the shrub density and height affects other things. Those are the things that we need to really focus on. And it's going to be like a major thing for me to look at over the next decade or two.
Interesting. I mean, basically, you're saying we need to redefine success, but we don't even know how to define it yet.
Well, and we need to redefine the fact that if you end up with a bunch of shrubs in your prairie, that's not the end of the world. Right? It's not a catastrophe. You haven't lost. It's not a disaster. It's just different. And we need to adjust to the new reality of, okay, I now manage a shrubby prairie. What do I want this to look like?
Yeah.
Who's going to be able to live here? How do I manage to favor those species? I'm gonna lose some things, right? I'm not gonna have grasshopper sparrows maybe if I have nothing but dogwood across my site, but I can still have quail. I can still have other things. Maybe it means that I'm gonna focus on making sure that I've got some patches that are small but completely free of shrubs. I'm managing for clearings within a matrix of shrubs now. Maybe that's the most important thing. And I don't know, by the way. I'm just throwing that out as an example, right?
But aren't shrubs dominant? Like, without human intervention, they would take over prairies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think woody plants in general. I mean, the reason that we have prairies at all is that indigenous people 10,000 years ago started burning and burned enough that in places like Iowa, it didn't all become trees. And so if we stop burning or stop doing something like that, even back then it would have become woody, and now the world is even more different. So
you're saying fire doesn't fight it, but grazing does, right?
it's both fire and grazing can be helpful, but neither of them by themselves is going to be the answer.
Interesting. Wow.
If
Wow, very
if if
complicated.
the answer is winning against shrubs, neither of them is going to be the answer. Both of them could be the answer in terms of managing height and density, depending on how you do it.
Well, I'm pretty sensitive to desertification, especially of the Midwest, because if we have desertification, nobody lives here anymore.
Right, yeah.
And so, do you see shrubs like contributing to desertification? I feel like I don't know how they hold soil compared to prairie.
I'm not worried about that, I don't think. I think what I'm worried about with shrubs is just sort of ending up with nothing but dense shrubs. And then trying to figure out what the heck we're going to do with the ground now, right? And this is not something, this has happened, right? In the Southern Plains, there's a lot of places where people have had to abandon cattle ranching, and then they moved to goats for a while, and then they had to abandon goats, and now they're doing deer hunting leases, and they make their money off of deer hunting leases. Places like Texas, there's parts of Texas where that's the case. And what I want for this part of the world is, let's not do that by default, right? Let's start learning now before we get completely swamped. Let's learn what it looks like to manage these things in different ways, so that by the time we have to make a decision, we kind of have some information to work with.
This is what I was saying right at the beginning of the episode. I was like, "There's a few leaders in the prairie industry, and Chris is one of them." And this is why. But you've done this time and time again. I mean, you were like one of the first people to start talking about how like the deep roots actually aren't necessarily where the prairie gets water. They're kind of a mystery, and now people talk about that, and
Just to clarify, that's not my research.
But
I just heard it from the researchers, and I said people need to know about this, and I put it out.
Yeah.
So I'll take credit for that part of it.
they're taking your thoughts, or you're taking your thoughts, and other people are running with them, and that's like the definition of a leader.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that you're on our side and you've got good thoughts.
Yeah.
So, well, sorry, Kate.
We got to talk about the square meter project.
Yep, we can't
All right.
get away from it, Chris.
Well, I've done it twice. So the first time I did this project was in 2018, and
What is it?
yeah.
What do you mean by
So
it?
going back to our conversation earlier about being a preacher, and you're always trying to find new ways to tell the same stories, right?
Yeah.
One of the stories that I love to tell about prairies, because I think it's really important, is to talk about how much is happening in prairies if you stop and get down and look,
Yeah.
right? And as a photographer, I love to take pictures of small things, flowers and insects on flowers and little mushrooms and all
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And so I find myself lying down on the ground a lot in prairies, and when I do that, I see so many things happening. And I think most people experience prairies from a distance, if they experience them at all. They experience them from a distance or from a height. And so I always encourage people to stop and slow down and look. So this idea popped into my head in January of 2018 that, what I should do is I should just pick a small area and focus all my photography or a lot of my photography effort on it, maybe for a year, and see what I can find just within one little area to help people sort of extrapolate how much must be out there in the world. And so I did. I just put 4 flags in the ground. Here in Aurora, Nebraska, where I live, there's a little prairie right on the edge of the town. It's a the little patch that I picked, at least, is a very skinny little strip of prairie between a tree line and the mowed area that's right next to our city waste site. There's a dog pound right on the edge of it. There's a mobile home village right there. So it's not wilderness by anyone's definition. But it was planted in 1980 by an organization called Prairie Plains Resource Institute. It was planted with a nice diversity of plants, and so I stuck 4 flags there, and I thought I'm just going to watch what happens in this little plot over the next year and see how much I can find. And it wasn't like a strict science project where I was trying to capture everything that was there, because the rules that I set for myself were I want to keep a list of all the species I find, but I'm only going to count a species if I get a good photo of it, like a good sharp image. Which means there's lots of things that, flew away or crawled away before I got a picture, or they were hiding and I couldn't see them or whatever. But I still, at the end of the year, I ended up with 113 plant and animal species that I photographed
Wow.
within a square meter, right? And I thought this is really fun. And it was not just the species, but it was like the beauty that I found. Like I found so many things to take pictures of that was just like a leaf with the light hitting in a certain way that was really pretty. And if I had walked past, I never would have seen it. But because I was on my hands and knees or laying on my belly staring
Yeah.
into this little space, I saw these
Intentionally
things.
looking for them. Yeah.
Which, as a creative person, as a photographer, that was fascinating and it was really good for me. And then scientifically, and just like as a communication tool, just the fact that I found 113 things in this little square meter, that was a pretty good story to tell. So I did that. I wrote a book about it. We got a museum exhibit out of it for 6 months. And I've given presentations and I've talked about it like this many, many times. But I thought I was done until 2024. And I went out to the same area and I was just curious to see if I could find my plot. And I couldn't find the flags anymore. It was all gone. And then a couple of weeks later, Prairie Plains, who manages the site, burned it. And I went back out and I found the little wires where my flags had been. So I reflagged
Wow.
it. And I thought, that's pretty cool. And I should
Yeah.
I should come back out here a few times this year and I could do like a quick follow up. It's like, hey, the plot's still there. Here's a few pictures from it. And so in early May, I went back out and everything was just starting to green up. And I took a few pictures and there were like water drops on the ground. And it was like, man, this is really fun. I forgot how much this is, how much fun this is to do it. And before I knew it, I was like full blown back into the project again. Um, and I ended up going way more times between May of 2024 and the end of April 2025. I was there like, I don't know, more than 100 times, way more than 100 times.
Wow.
Wow.
And I
That's so cool.
photographed 320 some species
Wow.
in that
That
square
was
meter
post
plot.
burn.
This was after the burn. So I think it was a combination of the fact that it had been burned, but also mostly I was just better at it and I cared more about it. I was better. I was a better observer. I was photographing things differently. It was just a lot of things. But yeah, as I talk here, I'll start sharing some photos.
Yeah. Yeah. Get them up on the screen here.
And I'm going to start with one, if I can figure out how to do this. I'm going to start with one here that was from that first day. This is the 5th of April, or the 5th of May, I'm sorry, 2024. And all I was doing is I was laying on my belly, taking pictures of little dewdrops in the morning on the grass that was about 3 inches tall. And I was like, man, this is so fun. And I wouldn't have done this if I hadn't just been laying there. And then a few minutes later, I saw this robin hopping around, and I thought, ooh, man, if I back off, I wonder if this robin will come hunt for worms inside this little plot. And so I took some pictures of raindrops for a while, and then
Beautiful.
there's a dandelion seed.
Yeah.
There's some little seedlings coming up, more raindrops. And then, here, let me stop sharing. Let me skip forward to the robin photo.
That dewdrop photo, that could have won like photo of the year somewhere. I mean, that was fantastic.
Well, and see, this is the thing that, like, there's so many photos that I'm proud of from within that square meter project that, like I said before, I never would have even thought about taking. Um, and yet, there's some of my favorite photos, and I would have walked past without seeing them. So, yeah, I'm super proud of the fact that it worked out that way.
Do you do prints of any of them ever?
I have I made prints of any of them? I'm looking around my room to see if I have any in here. No, but I don't. But that's only because I don't do a lot of prints.
Yeah.
I mostly work with magazines or places where I can share an image and then they do the printing because I don't feel like doing that. That's a lot of logistics for me.
Man.
But anyway, so this robin was hopping around, and sure enough, after a couple of minutes, it like hopped right into the middle of the plot, so you can see two of the flags that I had just stuck in the ground. And that robin started poking around, and at that point, I was hooked. Like there was no way I wasn't
Yeah.
going to do this project. And so, yeah, I dove right back in. One of the surprises I talk about is that what I thought was going to happen was I was going to be so busy focusing on this one little square meter that I was going to be frustrated that I wasn't out taking pictures other places.
Sure.
Because my normal process is I show up to a prairie, I don't know what I'm going to take pictures of, and I just sort of go wherever the light is or wherever the color is, and I explore that way. And I'm moving around a lot, and I really enjoy that. And it felt like, well, maybe I'm just going to be locked down into this one little place, and I'm going to get really frustrated. And it was the exact opposite. Because what would
Wow.
happen is that on the days where I didn't go to the plot, I would go somewhere else, either for work or to go out wander. And all I could think about, the only thing on my mind was what's happening back at
Yeah.
my plot that I'm missing because I'm not
Wow.
there, right? There's all these things
Yeah.
that are going on. Yeah.
There's like a
So,
book worth of life lessons in that. And yeah,
oh,
that's
yeah.
so cool.
So I'll just, maybe while we're talking here, I'll just scan through a few things.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'd
Just
love to see
showing
'em.
the sort of the diversity because again it wasn't just about counting plants, right? It was or insects or things like that, but it was really about what do you see when you really start to focus in a little area. So here's the plot with the four flags. This
Is
is a
that
photo.
bergamot?
This is kind of late May. So there's some sedges in the foreground. There's Maximilian sunflower. And then, sometimes it was just dewdrops on lead plant. A ladybug just sitting there.
That's crazy.
When the flowers started blooming, there was butterfly milkweed in the plot, which was great, but you didn't have to be blooming to be pretty. Even just the buds I thought were really interesting.
Yeah.
And then you start seeing, harvestmen like a daddy longlegs here.
Yeah.
Here's a male crab spider with butterfly milkweed in the background, or a tree cricket. That orange color was far and artistically to put behind us. I went out one night because there was a rainbow, and I missed a lot of the rainbow color. But then the mammatus clouds came back over, and so I was able to use that as a background.
The insect ones are just
Yeah,
insane.
Yeah.
milkweed
They're real
bugs.
good.
Here's milkweed leaf,
Buds. Yeah.
little cucumber beetle. So again, like you notice that not all of these are species portraits as much as just things that when I force myself to look at one small area, there's a lot happening. So this is a little hoverfly.
like-
If you look at this picture at the top right, you can see these little streaks. That's grass pollen blowing around in the wind
Wow.
because this little fly is feeding on the grass pollen. It's holding it like a little burrito right now in the picture, and it's feeding on that little burrito of an anther of a big blue stem with the pollen particles flying off into the air. Just so fun.
Oh,
The dew off the big blue there.
Yeah, some more dewdrop shots. Soldier beetles are a big thing late summer.
Mm-hmm.
Even right now, still they're going out there. There's
All right, if you guys are
Indian
listening to
grass.
this, I need everyone to do two things. You got to go on YouTube and see these photos. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then I need you to email Chris and demand that he starts doing prints so that I could have one in my house.
Man, you can have all of these online for free. Go to my blog and there's a tab that says Square Meter Project. You just look at
Oh,
them and you can have them. You don't have to pay for
they're
anything.
so
Why would you
cool.
want to pay for it?
These are beautiful.
But what's fun is I've got presentations. I've given hour-long presentations where I do nothing but show photos from a square meter of land over the course of an hour. I never run out of them. Sometimes I have to speed up and go through a bunch of them really quick to get through all of them, and I still don't get through all of them. And I
Wow.
can just talk the whole time about what I saw and the stories that because it's more than just the visuals. A lot of it is also like what I felt or what I learned or seeing the
Sure.
same plants and the same thing over time. So like these
Yeah.
milkweed bugs, I got to watch them grow up in front of me. They little nymphs that grew up. The adults, I just showed this picture of an adult milkweed bug, which by the way is a migratory species. I learned that.
Huh.
I started looking up information, and this little bug right there migrates long distances, like
Are they
half the
native?
population every year.
Are they native bugs?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, they're another great example. If you get those bugs on your milkweed plant in your yard, you're doing something right. You're providing habitat for a specialist insect that needs
Yeah.
that plant that you've just
Is that a
provided.
is that a blister beetle?
No,
Is
this
that
is
what it
oh shoot, what is it? It's a bug. It's a true bug of some kind. I forget the name of it now. Here's the harvest moon in October that came up. So I just went out at night in the dark and took pictures of sunflowers in front of the harvest moon.
Yeah.
Lead plants started turning colors late in the year. Here's another one of the milkweed bugs. This is a different milkweed bug, nymph.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just color and textures. I got into the winter and I kept going to take pictures of frost and snow.
That's so cool.
And then in the
Wow,
spring,
very
in
sweet.
April, I was out there because I knew I had just a little bit of time before my year was going to end, and I had set this deadline for myself, which is my own deadline, but I stuck to it. And so I was scrambling to take pictures of everything I could that spring. And this was actually on the very last day. I took this picture of this little lynx spider, which I
Yeah.
loved because lynx spiders became like my little buddies. I saw them all the time, males and females, and I assume I saw the same one, but I got to see a lynx spider with an egg sac, and she guarded that egg sac for days and days, and then they hatched, and then I had little lynx spider babies all over the place in the plot for a few days. You just get these personal attachments to things that are happening
Yeah.
within, again, 1 by 1 meter little area.
Right.
And it was just it was just great.
Wow.
That's so cool.
Wow, wow, wow. My counselor talks a lot because I asked him once, what would you write a book about if you could? He said, well, my little corner of the world. Like I just want to take my little corner of the world and leave it better than I left it, and like get really attached to it, and I think
I like that.
and there's something beautiful about the grandiose of the universe and the world and leading change and movements but it is not more beautiful than 1 square meter of prairie. I mean, it's really fantastic.
It's
Well, and
biodiversity.
one of the other things I like about this project is that it's very accessible. Like anybody could do a project like this.
True.
Even if you don't take a camera with you, just picking out a little spot to watch and then just sort of sinking down into it and paying attention. It could be, a little corner of the garden in your yard. It could be a potted plant on your balcony. It could be the sidewalk crack outside where you just look at the ants that are moving. I mean, just the idea of what would I find if I just looked closely in this spot? That's really accessible. And then the second thing that I love about it is it does highlight the diversity of prairies, right? That I found all these things, and if I could find all this in one little plot, imagine how much is happening within a larger prairie near you. You should go look, right? Go find that stuff. Go explore it and find those things that I saw.
Man. Well, Chris, it's been a huge
Beautifully
deal
said.
that you've spent so much time with us. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and our listeners.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Man, we really, really appreciate it.
And give
For
us some good prairie management strategies too.
Oh,
and philosophy. I love
Yeah,
that.
this was
cattle.
fun. This was fun.
had a
Who knew
great
cattle?
time.
They're okay.
Oh man, yeah. Big fan of the old cattle. For everyone listening, the Prairie Ecologist is at the prairieecologist.com.
Yep.
prairieecologist.com, Prairie Ecologist on Instagram. Go and check out what he's doing. He does really, really cool things. He's got incredible thoughts, and he articulates them well. So if you read anything and you like Prairie, this is something to be reading. His blogs. We really appreciate his time and wish you the best on your projects you've got coming up, especially this whole shrub thing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It's gonna be a wild ride, but it should be fun.
Awesome. Listen, everyone, Kent and I, we don't have the mind that Chris Helzer does. Most people listening don't, and that's okay. We still can make a huge impact on conservation because conservation happens one mind at a time.